Hello everyone, my name is Mayeli Rojas and I will explain learning styles the strategies students use to learn a language and how teachers can apply them in the classroom. Okay, what are learning styles? They are each student's natural and preferred way of learning, reflecting in their cognitive structure and personality. Every person learns differently. This depends on cognitive, sensory, and personality factors. Therefore, understanding these styles allow us as teachers to adapt our teaching to the needs of each student. Mhm. Okay. Types of learning styles. Christensen classified learning styles into three main groups. First, let's look at Taiwan. Cognitive styles. These are field dependent. When information is presented within a broader context, learning is more effective. The students find it easier to speak the language. For example, a student better understands the use of the simple past tense when the teacher shows them a complete history about the topic and the points of the verbs. If they are only given the grammar rule, they become confused. And when they practice conversation, they express themselves much better. Feel independent. Prefer a structured step-by-step approach to learning. For example, a student prefer to learn English with a clear list of steps. First, study the grammar rule, then look at examples, and finally do individual exercise. If the activity doesn't have a structure, he doesn't know where to start. Mhm. Analytic, these students work best alone and prefer individual tasks. For example, they study vocabulary, make organize lists, and create phrase core. Yeah, they don't like group activities because they feel they progress more slowly. While global, they prefer to work in groups. For example, a student does better when they do group projects. It helps them to hear others' ideas to better understand the topic. Reflective. Learn best when given time to think about the information before responding. For example, when the teacher asks questions in English, a student doesn't answer quickly. They prefer to think first about how to structure their sentences in English and then answer. And finally, impulsive. Respond quickly and is more willing to take risk. For example, in class, the teacher asks, for example, what did you do yesterday? And the student answer quickly. For example, I go to the park. Is incorrect. So even so, they aren't afraid of making mistake and participate. Type 2, sensory learning style. Divide into two categories, perceptual and environmental. Perceptual, visual, prefer to learn with visual aids such as diagram and image. For example, when we learn a topic with visual aids like image, we are more likely to remember it. Auditory. Learn best by listening spoken conversation. For example, we listen to someone speaking the language in a conversation, or we can listen to a podcast, for example. We can repeat the phrases uh, sometimes. Tactile. Benefits from hands-on experience or physical interaction with learning materials. For example, to learn classroom vocabulary, we can touch the names object. For example, chair, door, table, and pencil. Kinesthetic learn best when physical activity is involved in learning. For example, the teacher gives commands in English such as sit, stand, or jump is more fun. Environmental. Physical, for some students, learning depends on the condition of the learning environment. For example, it's easier to learn English in a quiet classroom with good lighting. Yeah. Sociological, the relationship with in the learning environment affect the learning experience. For example, some students find it better to learn English working in a group or with a friend. Type 3. Personality styles. Tolerance for ambiguity. This shows how comfortable students feel when there is no single certain answer. Some accept several options, while others prefer just one option. Yeah. For example, students might need the teachers to explain each new word before continuing with the task or exam. Left brain dominance. Students are more analytical, visual, and reflective in their learning. Right, right brain is dominant. Students are more auditory, interactive, and prefer a broader, more holistic approach to learning. Okay, now let's look at what are learning strategies. They are the mental and communicative techniques that the student use to learn and use the language. No one knows how to use them in the beginning, but we can learn and teach them. Cognitive strategies. Classifying groups similar elements according to their shared characteristics. For example, we can classify words like transportation, is car, bus, train. Predicting. Anticipate what will be learned based on the context, such as untitled and objectives. For example, we can see just the title and guess what it will be about. Inducing, identifying patterns or regularities in information. For example, we can see what information is important about a topic and what information is not. Taking notes. Write the most important information in your own words to better understand it. For example, when the teacher explains the lesson, write the most important points on the topic in or in the book. Concept mapping. Visually organize the main ideas of a text. For example, um, we can create a concept maps about how to answer questions in the past, in the present, and the future tenses. Inferencing. Using what we already know to understand new words. For example, if we know what means dizzy, means mareado, and the sentence say I feel dizzy, we can understand the context without knowing all the words. Discriminating. Identify the difference between the main idea and supporting information. Find the most important information. Diagramming, use the information from a text to create a diagram. For example, create a diagram comparing the simple present and present continuous tenses. Interpersonal strategies, cooperation, sharing ideas with other students and completing tasks. For example, if they analyze the topic of the simple present tenses, students could form groups to better understand the topic and practice. Role playing. Practice using the language in context. For example, students could create a conversation where one student is the customer and another is the owner. Linguistic strategies. Conversational patterns. Using expressions or phrases to start and maintain conversations, like you could use expression, how are you, how's everything going. Practicing. Repeating exercise help with learning. Repeat dialogues until you memorize them, such as where are you from or I am from. Using context. Using the context surrounding a word or phrase to infer its meaning. For example, if we read a sentence and don't know the meaning of a word, we can guess using the context. Summarizing, extract the main points of the text directly. For example, when reading information, we can extract the most important points. Selective listening, focusing on the important information in a conversation without worry about understanding every word. For example, uh, we can listen to a podcast and write information such as the place mentioned or age. Skimming, reading quickly to grasp the main idea or overall meaning of a text. For example, we can read the text quickly without translating each word, but rather trying to understand the context. Okay, affective strategies. Personalizing, sharing personal opinions, feelings, or ideas about the topic. For example, speaking in English about the topic of interest such as food, and animals, or sound. Self-evaluating. This means reflecting on one's performance in a task and evaluating on oneself based on how well one did. For example, after an exam, students can review their score. Reflecting. Thinking about preferred learning methods and how one learns best. For example, some students learn by listening to music, others by reading. Yeah. Creative strategy, brainstorming, generating a large number of ideas or words in a short time. For example, the teacher could say a word and the students should write all the related words they can remember. For example, the teacher says school, they could write book, pen, marker. Yeah. Well, now let's look at strategies for teacher children. Strategies for teacher children, social and affective strategies. This helps students recognize how their own emotions and those of others affect their learning process. Awareness raising strategies. These focus on impressing students' understanding of the nature and process of language learning. Metacognitive strategies. These improve students' ability to think critically about their learning by planning and evaluating their language learning effort. Direct or cognitive strategies. These help students process and manage linguistic information. Mhm. Okay. Techniques for teacher strategies. With young children, we use strategies that allow them to be aware of their own progress and foster basic cognitive skills such as prediction and classification. With older students, we can introduce reflections, self-assessment, conversational practice, and more complex strategies. Managing English as a foreign language classroom for teaching children. Classroom management is very important. Children have short attention span, so we must create a safe environment, organize groups work, and encourage interaction for learning. Well, in conclusion, understanding different styles and strategies improves teaching for the students. It allows for personalization, support each student, and fosters more meaningful learning. Since every student is different. Here is the references. Thank you so much for your attention.